Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting history. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Alright, it is Wednesday. And not just any Wednesday, but a very important Wednesday. I'm sure most of you know what today is. It is 9/11. A very significant day. It's one of those days where people ask, where were you, or what was happening when this event happened. It changed a lot of lives, and it's an important day to remember. Like every event in the past, it's something that we need to learn from. So today's video is dedicated to the events of 9/11/2001. Yeah, that's right. I almost forgot what year it was. And I was very careful with my pictures. I tried to be fun and respectful. So hopefully they're okay. It was hard to kind of think of something that was not too serious, wouldn't be offensive, things like that. I was going to talk about the events of the building of the Pentagon, because oddly enough that happened on the same day, way back in history. So, but before all of that historical, emotional stuff, we're going to do a race. Another new race. This one is farm animals. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. Ooh, set. And start. Okay, there we go. There's She Stole. There's Ron. There's Cable. There's Lane. There's I. We got Melinda. There's Marketplace. Cruising Nuts. There's Goat. Is Goat actually a goat? We've got goats, dogs, piggies, sheep, cows. Let's see, Mark, there's Keep Digging, there's Ohio, there's Swish, and there's Gazelle, there's Ian, there's Bobby, there's Pinned, let's see here, who else do we got? Abundance is back there, there's Makeup. Oh, it's going to be Lashes and that little cute little piggy. Alright, here's Miss Lashes. Says, welcome to our family. Hope you enjoy our journey of nature, homeschooling, gardening, health, real estate, and life over 40. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Alright, and as you can see, she's got some daily workouts, relaxing, nature sounds. Some shorts about health and stuff. And then, of course, some lives are hanging out, mindful, homeschool, gardening, all kinds of stuff. So basically just life and a vlog of sorts. So check her out. Enjoyed the video. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. Alright. Bearded Historian is going to tell us about a moment in history.
Now, a couple moments of history. Because, you know, everybody is, I mean, you can't take and make much of a guess on September 11th. I mean, hello.
What?
But, a little interesting tidbit. prior to World War II, the United States government, on September 11th, started construction of a building around D.C. And at the time, our Department of War was headquarters in a munitions building, a temporary structure erected during World War I, along Constitution Avenue in the National Mall. Well, the War Department, which was a civilian agency created to administer the Army, was spread out at additional temporary buildings on the National Mall, as well as dozens of other buildings in the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area. By the late 1930s, during the Great Depression and federal construction program, a new War Department building was constructed at the 21st and C Streets in Foggy Bottom, but upon completion, the new building did not solve the space problem. It became headquarters of the Department of State. Well, when World War II broke out in Europe in 1939, the War Department rapidly expanded to deal with this current issue, and anticipation that the United States would be drawn into the conflict. Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson found the situation unacceptable, with the munitions building overcrowded and the department offices spread out to additional sites. Well, Stimson told the President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in May of 1941 that the War Department needed additional space. Now, on the 17th of July, 1941, a congressional hearing took place, organized by Representative Clifton Woodrum from Virginia, regarding possible proposals for a new War Department. Well, Woodrum pressed Brigadier General Eugene Raybould, who represented the War Department at the hearing, for an overall solution to the department's space problem rather than building yet another temporary building. Raybould agreed to report back to Congress within 5 days. The War Department called upon its construction chief, General Brayton de Somerville, to come up with a plan. Well, the plan would agree for the development of a federal office building, number 1, which would be constructed in Arlington County across the river from Washington in Virginia. Now, requirements for the new building would be no more than 4 stories tall. It would use a minimal amount of steel to reserve that resource for the war needs. The requirements meant that instead of rising vertically, the building would be sprawling over a large area. Possible sites for the building included the Department of Agriculture's Arlington Experimental Farm, adjacent to the Arlington National Cemetery, and the obsolete Hoover Field site. Well, the site first chosen was Arlington Farms, which had an asymmetric, roughly pentagonal shape, so the building planned accordingly as an irregular pentagon. The concern that the new building could obstruct the view of D.C. from the Arlington Cemetery, President Roosevelt selected the Hoover Airport site instead. The building retained the pentagonal layout because Roosevelt liked it, and a major redesign at that stage would have been costly. Free to the constraints of the Arlington Farm site, the building was modified as a regular pentagon. It resembled the star forts constructed during the Gunpowder Age. Well, on the 28th of July, Congress authorized funding for a new Department of War building in Arlington, which would house the entire department under one roof. President Roosevelt officially approved the Hoover Airport site on the 2nd of September, and while the project went through some of the approval process in late July 1941, Somerville selected the contractors, including John McShane, Inc. of Philadelphia, which had built the Washington National Airport in Arlington, the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, and the National Naval Medical Center at Bethesda, Maryland, along with Wise Contracting Company, Inc., and Doyle and Russell, both from Virginia. In addition to the Hoover Airport site and other government-owned land, construction of the Pentagon required an additional 287 acres.
Oh, wow.
Which were acquired at a cost of $2.2 million, or in today's money, $35.2 million. Now, the Hell's Bottom neighborhood, consisting of numerous pawn shops, factories, and approximately 150 homes, and other buildings around Columbia Pike, were cleared to make way for the Pentagon. Later, 300 more acres of land were transferred to the Arlington National Cemetery in Fort Myer, leaving 280 acres for this Pentagon. Well, the Pentagon, give you a size definition here. When you think about thousands of feet, 100 meters, 100 meters long is like the size of a oil tanker. That's how wide the building is.
Wow.
going basically from one end of the building to the other end of that little plaza in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
That was as long as the Yamato battleship.
Cool.
Yeah, it was an absolutely huge structure they were talking about putting together. In fact, it's from one end to the other, straight through the middle. It's about the same size as the Empire State Building if you knocked it over. The Empire State Building is just a little bit longer.
Little bit.
Little bit. Now, contracts, we always love contracts, totaling $31.1 million were finalized with McShane and the other contractors on the 11th of September, 1941, and ground was broken for the Pentagon the same day. In today's money, that's $497 million.
Wow.
Now, among the design requirements, Somerville required that the structural design accommodate floor loads up to 150 psi in case the building became a record storage facility after the end of the war. A minimal amount of steel was used as it was in short supply. Instead, the Pentagon was built as a reinforced concrete structure using 680,000 tons of sand dredged from the Potomac River. A lagoon was also created beneath the Pentagon's river entrance. To minimize the steel usage, concrete ramps were built rather than installing elevators, and Indiana limestone is used for the building's facade. Now, agricultural and structural design work for the Pentagon proceeded simultaneously with construction, and with additional drawings provided in early October 1941, most of the design work was completed by the 1st of June in 1942. At times, construction work got ahead of the design with the materials used other than those specified in the plans. Pressure to speed up the design and construction intensified after the attack on Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December, 1941, with Somerville demanding that 1 million square feet of space at the Pentagon be available for occupation by the 1st of April, 1943. Chief Architect Bergstrom resigned in April 1942 after he was charged with unrelated improper conduct as president of the American Institute of Architects.
Well, that's not scary or anything.
No. David J. Whitmer replaced Bergstrom on the 11th of April, and construction was completed on the 15th of January, 1943. Now, soil conditions of the site on the Potomac River floodplain presented some challenges, as did the varying elevations across the site, which ranged from 10 to 40 feet above sea level. 2 retaining walls were built to compensate for the elevation variations, with cast-in-place piles were used to deal with soil conditions. The construction of the Pentagon was completed in approximately 16 months at a total cost of $83 million, in equivalent to $1.33 billion in 2023. The building's approximate height is 77 feet, and each of the 5 sides is 921 feet in length. Now, the building was built wedge by wedge. Each wedge was occupied as soon as it was completed, even as construction continued on the remaining wedges. What's that banging? That's the 4th wedge. The Pentagon was designed in accordance with the racial segregation laws enforced in the state of Virginia at the time, with separate eating and lavatory accommodations for white and black people. While the sets of lavatories were side by side, the dining areas for blacks were located in the basement. When Roosevelt visited the facility before its dedication, he ordered removal of the whites-only signs in segregated areas. When the governor of Virginia protested, Roosevelt's administration responded that the Pentagon, though on Virginia land, was under federal jurisdiction. In addition, its military and civilian federal employees were going to comply with the president's policies. As a result, the Pentagon was the only building in Virginia where racial segregation laws were not enforced. These laws were not overturned until 1965. The side-by-side sets of restrooms still exist, but they have been integrated in practice since the building's been occupied. Now, one of the building's main concourse is the Hall of Heroes, opened in 1968, and dedicated more than 3,460 recipients of the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military decoration. The 3 versions of the Medal of Honor, Army, Sea Service for the Marines, Navy, and Coast Guard, and the Air Force for the Air Force and Space Force, are on display with the names of the recipients. The hall is also used for promotions, retirements, and other ceremonies. Now, from 1998 to 2011, the Pentagon was completely gutted and reconstructed in phases to bring it up to modern standards, improve security and efficiency. Asbestos was removed, and all office windows were sealed. As originally built, the Pentagon's office space consisted mostly of open bays which spanned the entire ring. These offices used cross-ventilation from operable windows instead of air conditioning for cooling. Gradually, bays were subdivided into private offices, with many using window air conditioning units. The renovations now complete, the new space included a plan with a return to open office bays and a new universal space plan of standardized office furniture and partitions. Now, during the late 1960s, the Pentagon became a focal point for protests against the Vietnam War. A group of 2,500 women organized the Women's Strike for Peace, demonstrated outside of Secretary of Defense's Robert S. McNamara's office at the Pentagon on the 15th of February, 1967. In May of 1967, a group of 20 demonstrators held a sit-in outside of the Joint Chief of Staff's office, which lasted 4 days before they were arrested. In one of the better-known incidences, in October 21st of 1967, some 35,000 anti-war protesters, organized by the National Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, that's a mouthful, gathered for a demonstration at the Defense Department, the March on the Pentagon. They were confronted by some 2,500 armed soldiers. During the protest, a famous picture was taken where George Harris placed carnations into a soldier's gun barrel. The march concluded with an attempt to exorcise the building. Now, on May 19, 1972, the Weather Underground organization bombed a fourth-floor women's restroom in retaliation for Nixon administration's bombing of the Hanoi in the final stages of the Vietnam War. And, of course, on March 17, 2007, 4,000 to 15,000 people, estimates vary significantly, protested the Iraq War by marching from the Lincoln Memorial to the Pentagon's north parking lot. Now, most of us do remember, obviously, September 11, 2001, coincidentally the 60th anniversary of the Pentagon's start of construction. And that's where we're going to talk to next. Because, commonly known as 9/11, these were 4 coordinated Islamic terrorist suicide attacks carried out by Al-Qaeda against the U.S. On that morning, 19 terrorists would hijack 4 commercial airliners scheduled to travel from the East Coast to California. The hijackers crashed 2 of the planes into the Twin Towers. A third one, as we were mentioning, hit the Pentagon. And the fourth one, interestingly enough, passengers managed to try to fight back and seize control of the plane, but unfortunately the suicide pilots crashed the plane into a field in Pennsylvania. Now, for the information off of these, the ringleader, Mohammed Atta, flew the American Airlines Flight 11 into the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex, Lower Manhattan, 8:46 a.m. 17 minutes later, at 9:03, the World Trade Center South Tower was hit by United Airlines Flight 175. Now, both towers would collapse 1 hour and 41 minutes, bringing about the destruction of the remaining 5 towers in the complex and damaging or destroying nearby buildings. The American Airlines Flight 77 flew towards Washington, D.C., crashed into the Pentagon at 9:37, causing a partial collapse. The fourth and final flight, United Airlines Flight 93, also had changed course, believed by investigators to either target the United States Capitol or the White House. Alerted to previous attacks, the passengers revolted against the hijackers, then crashed the aircraft into Stony Creek Township near Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 10:03 a.m. The Federal Aviation Administration ordered an indefinite ground stop for all air traffic in the U.S. airspace at 9:45, 59 minutes after the first impact, preventing any further aircraft departures until September 13th and requiring all airborne aircraft to return to their point of origin or divert to Canada. The actions undertaken in Canada to support incoming aircraft and their occupants were collectively titled Operation Yellow Ribbon. That evening, Central Intelligence Agency informed President Bush that the Counterterrorism Center had identified the attacks as having been the work of al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden. Now, the United States formally responded by launching the War on Terror, invading Afghanistan to dispose the Taliban, which rejected the conditions of the U.S. terms to expel al-Qaeda from Afghanistan and extradite its leaders. The U.S.'s invocation of Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, its only usage to date, called upon allies to fight al-Qaeda. As the U.S. and NATO invasion forces swept through Afghanistan, bin Laden had eluded them by disappearing into the White Mountains. He denied any involvement until 2004, when excerpts of a taped statement in which he accepted responsibility for the attacks were released. Al-Qaeda cited motivations including the U.S. support of Israel, the presence of U.S. military bases in Saudi Arabia, and sanctions against Iraq. Now, the nearly decade-long manhunt for bin Laden completed on May 2nd, 2011, when he was killed during a U.S. military raid on his compound in Pakistan. Now, the war against Afghanistan would continue for another 8 years until an agreement was made in February of 2020 for American NATO troops to withdraw from the country. And, of course, more than a few of us remember when they left the region on August 30th, 2021, at which the Taliban quickly returned to power.
What?
But, excluding the hijackers, the attacks on 9/11 killed 2,977 people, injured thousands more, and gave rise to a substantial long-term health consequences, which also caused $10 billion in infrastructure and property damages. It remains the deadliest terrorist attack in history, as well as the deadliest incident for firefighters and law enforcement personnel in American history, killing 343 firefighters and 72 members, respectively. Loss of life stemming from the impact of Flight 11 made it the most lethal multiplane crash in aviation history, followed by the death toll incurred by Flight 175. The destruction of the World Trade Center and its environs seriously harmed the U.S. economy and induced global market shocks. Many other countries strengthened anti-terrorism legislation and expanded their powers of law enforcement and intelligence agencies. The total number of deaths caused by the attacks, combined with the death tolls from the conflicts they directly incited, has been estimated by the Cost of War Project to be over $4.5 million. Now, the cleanup of the World Trade Center site, aka Ground Zero, took 8 months and was completed by May 2002, while the Pentagon was repaired within a year. After delays in the design of a new replacement complex, 6 new buildings were planned to replace the lost towers, along with a museum and a memorial dedicated to those who were killed or injured in the attacks. The tallest building, the One World Trade Center, began construction in November of 2006 and opened in November of 2014. Memorials to the attacks include the National September 11th Memorial and Museum in New York City, the Pentagon Memorial in Arlington County, Virginia, and the Flight 93 National Memorial at the Pennsylvania crash site. Now, if you want to take and have your general history lesson class.
What?
Now, Al-Qaeda, interestingly enough, used to be the good guys. Back in 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden traveled to Afghanistan to help organize the Mujahideen, Arab Afghani rebels, to resist the communist invaders. Now, they were there in the country until 1989, and in 1984, bin Laden, along with Islamic scholar Abdul Azam, formed the Maktab al-Qurmat, or MAK, an organization to support Arab Mujahideen who came to join the jihad in Afghanistan. Well, the CIA funneled several $1 billion worth of weapons to the indigenous Mujahideen resistance, a portion of which led to Arab volunteers. However, no direct evidence of the U.S. aid to bin Laden or any of his affiliates were ever uncovered. Well, in 1996, our buddy bin Laden issued his first fatwa, which declared war against the United States and demanded the expulsion of all American soldiers from the Arabian Peninsula. A second fatwa in 1998 outlined his objections to the American foreign policy with respect to the State of Israel, as well as his continued presence of American troops in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War. Bin Laden maintained that Muslims are obliged to attack American targets until the aggressive policies of the U.S. against Muslims was reversed. According to Bin Laden, Islamist jurists had, throughout Islamic history, unanimously agreed that the jihad is an individual duty if the enemy destroys the Muslim countries. Well, the Hamburg cell in Germany included Islamists who eventually became key operatives in the 9/11 attacks. Muhammad Atta, Marwan al-Shihi, Ziad Jarrah, Rami bin al-Shib, and Said Bahai were all members of the Al-Qaeda's Hamburg cell. Bin Laden asserted that all Muslims must wage a defensive war against the United States and combat American aggression. He further argued that military strikes against American assets would send a message to the American people attempting to force the U.S. to reevaluate its support on Israel and other aggressive policies. In a 1998 interview with an American journalist, John Miller, Bin Laden stated, "We do not differentiate between those dressed in military uniforms and civilians. They are all targets in this fatwa. American history does not distinguish between civilians and military, nor not even women and children. They are the ones who used bombs against Nagasaki. Can these bombs distinguish between infants and military? America does not have a religion that will prevent it from destroying all people, so we tell the Americans as people, and we tell the mothers of soldiers and American mothers in general, that if they value their lives and the lives of their children, to find a nationalistic government that will look after their interests and not the interests of the Jews. The continuation of tyranny will bring the fight to America, as the 1993 World Trade Center bomber Ramin Youssef yourself and others did. This is my message to the American people, to look for a serious government that looks out for their interests and not to attack others, their land or their honor. My word to American journalists is not to ask why we did that, but to ask why their government has done that forced us to defend ourselves." Well, Bin Laden orchestrated the September 11th attacks. He initially again denied involvement, but later recanted his denial. Al Jazeera broadcast a statement of him on September 16, 2001, stressing, "I stress that I have not carried out this act, which appears to have been carried out by individuals with their own motivation." Now, in November 2001, U.S. forces recovered a videotape from a destroyed house in Afghanistan, and in the video, Bin Laden talking to Khalid al-Harbi, and then in foreknowledge of the attacks. On December 27th, 2001, a second video of Bin Laden was released in which he, stopping short of admitting responsibility for the attack, said, "It has become clear that the West in general, and America in particular, have an unspeakable hatred for Islam. It is the hatred of crusaders. Terrorism against America deserves to be praised because it is a response to injustice aimed at forcing America to stop its support for Israel, which kills our people. We say that the end of the United States is imminent, whether Bin Laden or his followers are alive or dead, for the awakening of the Muslim nation has occurred. It's important to hit the economy of the United States, which is the base of its military power. If the economy is hit, they will become reoccupied." Now, shortly before the 2004 United States presidential election, Bin Laden used a taped statement to publicly acknowledge al-Qaeda's involvement in the attacks. He admitted a direct link to the attacks and said they were carried out because, in his words, "the events of the affected my soul in a direct way, which started in 1982, when America permitted the Israelis to invade Lebanon, and the American Sixth Fleet helped them in that. This bombardment began, and many were killed and injured, and others were terrorized and displaced. I couldn't forget those moving scenes, blood and severed limbs, women and children sprawled everywhere. Houses were destroyed along with their occupants, high-rise demolished over their residents, rockets raining down on our homes without mercy. As I looked at those demolished towers in Lebanon, it entered my mind we should punish the oppressor in kind, and that we should destroy towers in America, so that they taste some of what we've tasted, so that they be deterred from killing our women and children. And that day it was confirmed to me that the oppression and the intentional killing of innocent women and children as a deliberate American policy. Destruction is freedom and democracy, while resistance is terrorism and intolerance. Now, bin Laden personally directed his followers to attack the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Another video obtained by Al Jazeera in September of 2006 showed bin Laden with one of the attacker's chief planners, as well as a hijacker, amidst making preparations for the attacks. Bin Laden had been on the Federal Bureau of Investigation's most wanted list since 1998 for the bombings of the U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. Now, journalist Yossiri Fuda of the American television channel Al Jazeera reported in April of 2002 Al-Qaeda member Khalid Sheikh Mohammed admitted his involvement in the attacks along with Ramzi bin al-Shibh. The 2004 9/11 Commission report determined that the animosity which Mohammed, the principal architect of 9/11s, felt towards the United States stemmed from his violent disagreement with U.S. foreign policy favoring Israel. Mohammed also had been an advisor and financier of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and the uncle of Ramzi Yousef, the lead bomber of that attack. In late 1994, Mohammed and Yousef moved on with their plan for a new terrorist attack called the Bojinka plot, planned for January 1995. Despite a failure and Yousef's capture by U.S. forces the following month, the Bojinka plot would influence the later 9/11 attacks. Now, in substitution for testimony of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed from the trial of Zacharias Modassari, 5 people are identified as having been completely aware of the operation's details. That is bin Laden, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Abu Turab Yarduni, and Muhammad Atif. Now, as for the motives, Osama bin Laden pretty much had already stated it out. He wanted a holy war against the United States to try to break our support of Israel. Bin Laden's strategy to support and globally expand the Al-Aqsa Intifada attacks that had happened against Muslims by a U.S.-led coalition in Somalia, and the U.S. support of the government of the Philippines against Muslims in the moral conflict. There's also the U.S. support for the Israeli occupation in southern Lebanon, U.S. support of Russian atrocities against Muslims in Chechnya, pro-American governments in the Middle East who act as your agents against Muslim interests, U.S. support of Indian oppression against Muslims in Kashmir, the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia. He basically didn't want the U.S. to have any hand dealing with Muslim nations in the Middle East, or pretty much around the world. Then, of course, he stuck in at the very end sanctions against Iraq and environmental destruction. Now, after the attacks, bin Laden and this Ayman al-Zawahiri released additional videotapes and audio recordings, some of which repeated the above reasons for the attacks. 2 relevant publications were bin Laden's 2002 Letter to the American People, and in 2004, a videotape by bin Laden, making mention, these young men, for whom God has cleared the way, didn't set out to kill children, but rather attack the biggest center of military power in the world, the Pentagon, which contains more than 64,000 workers, a military base which has a big concentration of army and intelligence. As for the World Trade Center, the ones who were attacked and died in it were part of the financial power. It wasn't a children's school. Neither was it a residence. The consensus is that most of the people who were in the towers were men who backed the biggest financial force in the world, which spreads mischief around the world.
Mischief.
And this was Obama's interview with Taseer Aludi on October 21st, 2001. Now, as an adherent of Islam, bin Laden believed that the non-Muslims were forbidden from having a permanent presence on the Arabian Peninsula. In 1996, bin Laden issued his fatwa calling for American troops to leave Saudi Arabia. In 1998, Al-Qaeda wrote, for over 7 years, the United States has been occupying the lands of Islam and the holiest places, the Arabian Peninsula, plundering its riches, dictating to its rulers, humiliating its people, terrorizing its neighbors, and turning its bases in the peninsula into a spearhead through which to fight the neighboring Muslim peoples. Of course, this is the same guy who seems to forget the reason why we were there back in the early 90s was to liberate Kuwait from Iraq. Now, 1999 December interview, bin Laden said he felt the Americans were too near to Mecca. Mecca is on the far side of the peninsula.
Too close.
Eesh. Thinking that this was considered a provocation to the entire Muslim world. One analysis of suicide terrorism suggested that without U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia, al-Qaeda would not have been able to get people to commit suicide missions. In the 1998 fatwa, al-Qaeda identified the Iraq sanctions as a reason to kill Americans, condemning the protracted blockade, among other actions that constitute a declaration of war against Allah, His Messenger, and Muslims. The fatwa declared that the ruling to kill Americans and their allies, civilian and military, is an individual duty for every Muslim who can do it in any country which it is possible to do it in order to liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Holy Mosque of Mecca from their grip, and in order for the Americans' armies to move out to all the lands of Islam, defeated and unable to threaten any Muslim. In 2004, bin Laden claimed that the idea of destroying the towers first occurred to him in 1982, when he witnessed Israel's bombardment of the high-rise apartments during the 1982 Lebanon War. Some analysts, including political scientist John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, also claimed that U.S. support for Israel was the motive for this attack. In 2004 and 2010, bin Laden again connected the September 11th attacks with U.S. support for Israel, although most of the letters expressed bin Laden's disdain for President Bush and bin Laden's hope to destroy and bankrupt the U.S. Other methods that have been suggested, in addition to those stated by bin Laden and al-Qaeda, some authors suggested the humiliation that resulted from the Islamic world failing behind Western world. This discrepancy was rendered especially visible by globalization and its desire to provoke the U.S. into a broader war against the Islamic world, and the hope of motivating more allies to support al-Qaeda. Similarly, others have argued that the 9/11 attacks were a strategic move to provoke America into a war that would incite pan-Islamic revolution. Now, documents seized during a 2011 operation that killed bin Laden included a few notes handwritten by bin Laden in September 2002 with the heading, "The Birth of the Idea of September 11th." In these notes, he described how he was inspired by the crash of an Egypt Air Flight 990 on October 31st, 1999, which deliberately crashed by co-pilot Gamal al-Batoui, killing over 200 passengers. So this is how the idea of 9/11 was conceived and developed in my head, and that is when we began the planning, bin Laden continued, adding that no one but Abu Hafs and Abu al-Khair knew about it at this time. The 9/11 Commission report identified Khalid Sheikh Mohammed as the architect, but is not mentioned in the bin Laden notes. Now, the attacks that were conceived by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who first presented to Osama bin Laden in 1996. At that time, bin Laden and al-Qaeda were in a period of transition, having just relocated back to Afghanistan from Sudan. The 1998 African embassy bombing in bin Laden's February Fatah in 1998 marked a turning point of al-Qaeda's terrorist operation, and bin Laden became intent on attacking the United States. In late 1998 and early 1999, bin Laden approved Mohammed to go forward with organizing his plot. Mohammed bin Laden and Mohammed Atif, bin Laden's deputy, held a series of meetings in early 1999. Atif provided operational support, including target selections and helping arrange travel for the hijackers. Bin Laden overruled Mohammed, rejecting the potential targets such as the U.S. Bank Tower in Los Angeles for a lack of time. Now, bin Laden provided leadership and financial support and is involved in selecting the participants. He initially selected Notaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Minhar, both experienced jihadists who had fought in Bosnia. Hazmi and Minhar arrived in the United States in mid-January 2000, and in early 2000, Hazmi and Minhar took flying lessons in San Diego. Both spoke very little English, performed poorly in flying lessons, and eventually served as secondary muscle hijackers. In late 1999, a group of men from Hamburg, Germany, arrived in Afghanistan. This group included Muhammad Atta, Marwan el-Shidi, Ziad Gara, and Razmi B. al-Sheikh. Bin Laden selected these men because they were educated, could speak English, and had experience living in the West. New recruits were routinely screened for special skills, and al-Qaeda leaders consequently discovered that Hani Hanjour had already had a commercial pilot's license. Muhammad later said that he had helped the hijackers blend in by teaching him how to order food in restaurants and dress in Western clothing. Now, Hanjour arrived in San Diego on December 8, 2000, joining Hazmi. They soon left for Arizona, where Hanjour was taking a refresher training. Marwan al-Shidi arrived at the end of May 2000, while Atta arrived on June 3, 2000, and Jara arrived on June 27, 2000. Bin al-Shib applied several times for visas to the United States, but as a Yemeni, he was rejected out of concerns he would overstay his visa. Bin al-Shib stayed in Hamburg, providing coordination between Atta and Muhammad. The three Hamburg cell members all took pilot training in South Florida at Huffman Aviation. Now, in the spring of 2001, the secondary hijackers began arriving in the United States. In July of 2001, Atta met with Bin al-Shib in Tarragona, Catalonia, Spain, where they coordinated details of the plot, including final target selection. Bin al-Shib, who passed along bin Laden's wish for the attacks to be carried out as soon as possible, some of the hijackers received passports from corrupt Saudi officials who were family members or used fraudulent passports to gain entry. Now, there have been a few theories on 9/11 that the selected by the hijackers as the date of the attack because it resembled 911, the phone number used to report emergency in the United States. However, Lawrence Wright wrote that the hijackers chose the date when John III Sobieski, the King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, began the battle that turned back the Ottoman Empire's Muslim armies that were attempting to capture Vienna on September 11th, 1683.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, during 1683, Vienna was the seat of the Holy Roman Empire and the Habsburg monarchy, both major powers in Europe at that time. For Osama, this was the date when the West gained some dominance over Islam, and by attacking on this date, he hoped to make a step in Islam, winning the war for worldwide power and influence. Now, in late 1999, al-Qaeda associate Walid bin Attash contacted Minhar and told him to meet at Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Hazmi and Abu Barar al-Yemeni would also be in attendance, and the NSA intercepted a telephone call mentioning the meeting, Minhar and the name Hazmi. While the agency feared something nefarious might be afoot, it took no further action. Now, CIA had already been alerted by Saudi intelligence about the status of Minhar and Hazmi as al-Qaeda members, and the CIA team broke into Minhar's Dubai hotel room to discover Minhar had a U.S. visa. While Alex Station alerted intelligence agencies worldwide about this fact, it did not share this information with the FBI. The Malaysian Special Branch observed on January 5, 2000, the meeting of the two al-Qaeda members and informed the CIA that Minhar, Hazmi, and Khalid were flying to Bangkok, but the CIA never notified the other agencies of this.
Why would they want to do that?
That's the biggest, dumbest problem that our intelligence agencies seem to have, is that they don't like talking with each other.
We cannot share information. We cannot share anything.
It's like, nor did the CIA, nor did the State Department put Minhar on its watch list. As FBI liaison to Alex Station asked permission to inform the FBI on the meeting, but was told this is not a matter for the FBI.
No.
By late June, senior counterterrorism official Richard Clark and CIA Director George Tenet were convinced that a major series of attacks were about to come, although the CIA believed the attacks would likely occur in Saudi Arabia or Israel. In early July, Clark put domestic agencies on full alert, telling them something spectacular is going to happen here, and it's going to happen soon. He asked the FBI and State Department to alert embassies and police departments and the Defense Department to go to Threat Condition Delta.
Clark later wrote, somewhere in the CIA there is information that 2 known al-Qaeda terrorists had come into the United States. Somewhere in the FBI there was information that strange things have been going on at flight schools in the United States. They had specific information about the individual terrorists from which one could have deduced what was going to happen, and none of this information got to me or to the White House. And this was in, July 2001. Well, with word spreading of an upcoming attack, a schism emerged among the senior leadership of al-Qaeda. Several senior members allegedly agreed with Mullah Omar. Those who reportedly sided with bin Laden included Atef, Salman al-Ghurab, and the KSM. But those who have opposed him were weighty figures in the organization, including Abu Hafs the Maturarian, Sheikh Saeed al-Masari, and Saif al-Adi. I do apologize if I'm butchering these names. I'm not very skilled at Islamic names. One senior al-Qaeda operative claims to recall bin Laden arguing that attacks against the United States needed to be carried out immediately to support insurgency in the Israeli-occupied territories and protest the presence of U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia. This comes out of the 9/11 Commission report from page 251.
Woo!
Well, July 13th, Tom Wilshire, a CIA agent assigned to the FBI's International Terrorism Division, emailed his superiors at the CIA's Counterterrorism Center requesting permission to inform the FBI that Hazmi was in the country and that Minhar had the visa. The CIA never responded. That same day in July, Marguerite Gillespie, an FBI analyst working at the CTC, was told to review material about the Malaysia meeting. She was not told of the participants' presence in the U.S. The CIA gave Gillespie surveillance photos of Minhar and Hazmi from the meeting to show the FBI counterterrorism, but they did not tell her their significance. This interlinked database informed her not to share the intelligence material at the meeting with criminal investigators.
No sharing.
It's like, well, we've got all this data. Let's not share it with the group,
No sharing.
Heaven forbid. In late August of 2001, we're closing in on the date, Gillespie told the INS, the State Department, the Customs Service, and the FBI to put Hazmi and Minhar on their watch list, but the FBI was prohibited from using criminal agents in searching for the duo, hindering their efforts. And also in July, a Phoenix-based FBI agent sent a message to FBI headquarters, Alex Station, and the FBI agents in New York, alerting them the possibility of a coordinated effort by Osama bin Laden to send students to the United States to attend civil aviation university and colleges. You guys are only a year late. The agent, Kenneth Williams, suggested the need to interview all flight school managers and identify all Arab students seeking flight training. In July, Jordan alerted the U.S. that al-Qaeda was planning on an attack on the U.S. Months later, Jordan notified the U.S. that the attack's code name was the Big Wedding and that it involved airplanes. Now, on August 6th, the CIA's Presidential Daily Brief, designated for the president only, was entitled Bin Laden Determined to Strike the U.S. The memo noted the FBI information indicated patterns of suspicious activity in the country consistent with preparations for hijackings or other types of attacks. In mid-August, one Minnesota flight school alerted the FBI about Zacharias Montessori, who had asked suspicious questions. The FBI found that he was a radical who traveled to Pakistan, and the INS arrested him for overstaying his French visa. The request to search his laptop was denied by the FBI headquarters due to the lack of probable cause. The failures of the intelligence sharing were attributed to a 1995 Justice Department policies limiting intelligence sharing, combined with the CIA and NSA reluctance to reveal sensitive sources and methods such as tapped phones. Testifying before the 9/11 Commission in April of 2004, Attorney General Joel Ashcroft recalled that the single greatest structural cause for the September 11th problem was the wall that separated and segregated criminal investigators and intelligence agents. Clark also wrote there were failures to get information to the right place at the right time. Now, most of us all know about the fact that, 4 planes were involved. 2 hit 2 towers. 1 hit the Pentagon, and the 4th one crashed. A couple of the things that always stood out strong, and I think this was part of the failure that they had, was back then, pre 9/11, one of the earliest things that they were taught, the pilots and the crews of these planes, is if there's a hijacking, you try to get them to calm down, you try to get a negotiation going, you try to get them to talk to the ground, find out what they want, whether it's to fly to another country, whether it's money, negotiate. The problem with these guys was there was no negotiating. They were, for their cause, they were willing to die and take as many people with them as they could. I remember that day very vividly. We were working a card shop up in Keystone. And the first thing I remembered was hearing my mom say that a tower's been hit. And the first thing that came to my mind was, a radio tower? Because in Rapid City, we've got these huge radio towers in the middle of the town. You can see them from miles away. I mean, you can see them almost all the way out to Wall.
Right.
And then when I came up the stairs and I saw what was on the TV, I was like, oh, that's not good. Now, you also got to remember, this is 2 hours distance out here. And when these hit, it was, 8:46 a.m. So it wasn't even, it wasn't even 7 a.m. our time. But, then the second plane hit shortly after at 9:03. But the other thing that really stands out to a lot of people is that, I've seen it a couple times already today on Facebook, is that on September 10th, there were a lot of people that went to bed that night that wouldn't see another day. They were either on those planes or they were in those towers. And it's something I hope we never have to see again. But for a lot of people, that was the changing of a world. 9/11, for this generation, is kind of like what my mom and dad had with Pearl Harbor, the JFK shooting. It's events that people will say, well, where were you? What happened on those days? 9/11, the effects, nowadays, all the security you have with airports, prior, it didn't exist. And it woke us up. I will say it was also really cool how patriotic and how much it actually pulled everybody together. Because all of a sudden, we were pissed. we wanted that bin Laden like nobody's business. People that very next day would go out and sign up to recruit. They had people who went out to help the firefighters, moving bricks and blocks and debris, looking for survivors. There were a lot of people that pulled together. And that's kind of the neat thing about us Americans, is that if there's a really bad situation, we tend to unite and go to try to help. But this has been the Bearded Historian with a 2-pack.
2-pack.
So you folks have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.